Greetings and welcome back to another iteration of MGTOW Talks. I'm here again with my friend CS MGTOW, and what we're going to be talking about today is absolutely fascinating and crucial. Clive recently made a video emphasizing the nature of scarcity in relationship to reproduction civilization, and in a lot of ways he kind of filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle with regards to the mechanization effect and all these things that later gave rise to the sort of runaway hypergamy and overt feminism we see in our society today. Really salient video, some really salient points, and I think it was such an important video that I'll be posting a link in the video itself as well as in the low bar to the video. But it certainly was worthy enough of actually expanding upon some of the things talked about in that video in an official MGTOW talk. So with that said, I'm going to let Clive take over for a bit and just explain, if you haven't watched the video, like I said, watch it. But Clive, why don't you explain the basic premises of the video and some of the conclusions that you reached?
Certainly. The basic premise of the video is that food being such an important, or the most important, resource that humans seek to possess, directly impacts how humans pair bond, our sexual strategy. So in times of food abundance, you'll see humans and primates, and even actually birds and reptiles, adopt very, very specific sexual strategies. So what will tend to happen is this, and we've seen this a lot in gibbons, because gibbons exist in parts of the forest where food is very, very scarce, they tend to pair bond more. And there are various kind of drivers behind this. Including the fact that, of course, it's just far more efficient to kind of come together in a unit and find food. And also because whenever gibbons have children, because food is so scarce, there's a necessity there for the father to stick around and make a huge parental investment in teaching the child how to forage for food, to essentially allow the child to survive adequately based on the resources available. But when we compare a completely different primate, such as, for example, savanna baboons, they operate on a very, very different sexual strategy based on the resources available to them. So within the savanna baboon, or where they tend to live, there are lots and lots of predators. As a result, they respond by having lots and lots of children. But of course, because there are predators, the numbers of the savanna baboons are kept down, so they don't actually have to do a lot of work to find food. They're not competing with lots and lots and lots of other savanna baboons to find food. As a result, they're far more sexually active earlier. They reproduce in far greater numbers than gibbons, who operate in environments of food scarcity. So I guess the whole kind of goal behind the video was to look at the impact of food scarcity on how people pair bond and see if there is potentially a link, however tenuous, with the MGTOW phenomenon.
Right, and I mean, we see this with a lot of rodent species, gerbils, rats, mice, rabbits. I mean, to breed like a rabbit is an expression for a good reason. These are rodents and mammals that are subject to a lot of predation, and so they need to rapidly reproduce. And just as a side note, and I plan one day making a video on this. There's another phenomenon related to this. There are certainly species. There's one species of, I forgot the name of it. It's either a mussel or a clam in the North Atlantic that has an incredibly long lifespan of 300 to 400 years, and for most of that time it's fertile. That is to say, it continues to reproduce. The lack of predation there is key. There's no predator hunting after it, and so if you have time to avoid predation, this is another element in addition to food scarcity, then yeah, you can basically live longer, because your point of entry there isn't, we need to reproduce as quickly as possible because a fox is going to eat us or something. It's just we basically have all the time in the world, more or less, and we can just hang out here for hundreds of years and keep on reproducing. So that's I just wanted to mention that as a point. Now, I think the most salient point I took from the video is the relationship of scarcity on reproductive strategy. And as I said, what I thought was missing in, say, the mechanization effect theory is, what specific elements lead to the mechanization effect. And of course, you can say pair bonding, but that in itself doesn't answer the question. But when you look at food scarcity and the relationship of food scarcity to a species, and human beings are no exception, we are the fifth ape, we can see how throughout history how food scarcity and other resources have a relationship to the kinds of mating strategies we see human beings engage in. We are primarily, not exclusively, social pair bonders, and it's more of it's a social arrangement primarily based on what's available to us.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess what is interesting is that we're now understanding a little bit more, or I guess MGTOW are now digging deeper into the exact mechanisms. So food scarcity, of course, impacts us, biochemically. In the video I discussed testosterone, and I know, of course, that you've mentioned that testosterone for sure is one of the kind of, I guess, hormones playing a factor there, but there are for sure other hormones. But we do know that the environmental impact of food scarcity on the internal environment that we have then, of course, I guess, predates an animal to a certain type of pair bonding strategy.
Yeah, and human beings with their large brains are typically much more flexible than other species. Now we see this. I was mentioning that I was watching a documentary on the war with ISIS and the Kurds, and some of these people interviewed, of course, were saying, well, so how many kids do you have? They say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in some cases. That in a resource-deprived environment, human beings tend to have a lot of children because they have to. They need to, make sure some of them are probably going to die, so some of them need to get across the next generation so they can reproduce themselves. And they need people who are going to support themselves, or sort of support the parents and make a contribution as well. In a resource-rich environment, you see a dramatic. I mean, Germany has the lowest birth rate in the world, not just in Europe, in the world. And it probably is, economically speaking, the most robust European country. So I think there's definitely a relationship there. And food is, we tend not to think about food as this thing because it's omnipresent these days. But almost certainly it's a really, really important factor. And without adequate food, without the onset of agriculture and all of these things, we wouldn't have civilization as we know it. And there's another element, as you pointed out in the video, that generally speaking, the more legumes, the more vegetable matter, the grains you eat, you tend to produce less testosterone. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but cholesterol, which was vilified for decades incorrectly, separate video, the lipid hypothesis, but is a precursor to sex hormones such as estrogen and testosterone. You need it, and your liver actually produces upwards of 60% of it on its own. But if you decrease your basically your animal product intake, then you're going to naturally probably produce less testosterone overall. And there's you can talk about some of the things you mentioned in the video with regards to estrogen cooperation and the relationship between aggression and testosterone.
For sure. I guess what the research is showing us is that the impact of testosterone has been pretty dramatic on civilization. So again, when organisms such as humans have lower testosterone as a result of food scarcity, we're far more likely to engage in cooperation, to engage in trade, as opposed to violently aggress against other species. And now again, I guess the way the researchers found this out was that they looked at thousands and thousands of skulls, but because testosterone affects us very, very dramatically in terms of our facial features. So what they found was that in periods of low testosterone, the individuals within that particular tribe or part of the world tended to have softer facial features. Individuals were far more likely to cooperate, and this was actually pretty dramatic. And I'd never actually thought of the impact of testosterone.
Well, think about neoteny. Well, one of the reasons why women have such neotenous features is because they're the estrogen cannons. I mean, and one of the reasons why men tend to have much harsher facial features is because of the androgens, because of testosterone. So naturally, if you have lower testosterone, you're going to have, in all likelihood, higher estrogen production, which is going to lead to softer facial features. I mean, just look at, I mean, this is an extreme example. Someone who's severely overweight or obese, their face tends to be very sort of roundish, and the idea, evoking the idea of sort of Santa Claus, a sort of jolly round face. It's not very harsh.
For sure. Well, I think that's a great point. And again, the impacts of, I guess, the environment on the testosterone, and then the impact of the testosterone on the sexual strategy was huge, because again, what was seen in all of the studies conducted was, when you have food scarcity and you have lower testosterone, humans have a very, very particular sexual strategy which involves delaying sexual activity till well after the age of puberty. In a lot of the cultures, they would often then implement religious, edicts to prohibit all forms of sexual activity well into the 30s, or they would at least, prohibit marriage well into the 30s. So this had a very, very kind of particular imprint on that civilization, in that, again, they would delay sex. Sex outside of marriage was certainly frowned upon, and in many cases violently punished by the state. And it all stemmed from this food scarcity impacting the sexual strategy that people needed to have. And these societies would then, enforce these sexual strategies because of that food scarcity. So it was like a reinforcing mechanism.
And another element I see here is, you mentioned that when testosterone levels drop and there's greater food scarcity, men, of course, tend to engage in greater commitment to relationships and paternal investment. Now, part of that, of course, is laboring harder and just working harder. Now, that seems to me would go hand in hand with in erecting the civilization, acquiring the skills, and becoming a blacksmith or an efficient farmer or a good fisherman. That over a year, you need years to hone some of these skills. Once you have the skills, then you can make an appropriate husband that can provide resources. So it seems to go hand in hand there.
Certainly. And what I tend to find very, very interesting is the ease, with which the humans, the human ape can just move between the two sexual strategies. So gibbons very, very much are the kind of dads on the spectrum, on the cads versus dad spectrum. Savanna baboons are very, very much the cads. But within a generation or two, humans can very, very quickly kind of shift back and forth. What I mean by...
So can baboons. Are you familiar with Sapolsky's work on this?
No, I'm not. Okay.
I should mention this. So basically what happened here, Robert Sapolsky, I don't even know how to class him as. He's a neurobiologist, a neuropsychologist. He's everything involving neurology, evolution, biology, psychology. That's kind of his thing. And so, that's basically what he is. A lot of it, he's done tremendously important research on stress and how it affects you, and cortisol. And he studied baboons in particular I believe, either in Kenya or Tanzania. And so he had some hands-on observations here, really just up close. And he observed a troop of baboons that the quote-unquote alpha males, the ones who, basically got the most sexual access because they were the most aggressive, the strongest, the biggest, they also had access to the first food sources. And for some reason, I don't freak the specific details, they ate some poisonous or some contaminated food source and they all died out.
Oh, yes, I know this.
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
Right. Within a generation or so, the quote-unquote beta, well, I guess they are beta in this context, beta baboons, they kind of created a new baboon society that was much more cooperative, much less aggressive, and much more tending towards the sort of paternal investment, pair bonding mode of operation, rather than the standard baboon method. So even lower primates, within given certain circumstances, can adapt. And I think this is telling because this probably is the most important adaptive feature in any species. A species that isn't able to adapt to its reproductive strategy to a change in environment, be it food or predation or lack thereof or whatever, it's going to go extinct. So you can imagine, let's just say, magically in Indonesia, that the gibbons all of a sudden their food was everywhere. I don't know what they traditionally eat, bananas, oranges, and what have you. They're just popping out of the sky. and all this foraging, and they're still engaging in this pair bonding thing. Well, the reality is, in that sort of circumstance, they could probably reproduce a lot more because food is in abundance, but they'd actually be missing out on reproductive opportunities that way.
Definitely.
So I think every species probably has some kind of hard-coded, hard-wiring mechanism that allows some way of adapting to environmental changes that is going to change their reproductive strategy and consequently their hormonal structure as well, because it's on this feedback loop.
Agreed. I mean, if the amounts of predators increase pretty dramatically in any given environment, the animals in that environment will, as a matter of absolute survival, have to reproduce more.
Or they'll die out.
Precisely. And again, I kind of hypothesized in my video, but again, I'm sure I'm not the first individual to ever say this, that because we can, or maybe because we, in addition to the other great apes, can move so fluidly between the cabs versus dads. And I'll kind of see that in this way, that, in my home country of Nigeria, people have a lot of children. It makes a lot of sense given the environment that we have. There's a lot of food scarcity, and we don't have a social, welfare system. So it makes a lot of sense to have children.
Violence is quite prevalent as well.
Precisely. And childhood mortality is much higher than the developed world, for example. What I'll tend to see is that, first generation, Nigerians who emigrate to, let's say, the UK will almost immediately just have less children. Within that first generation, they will just say, okay, well, I'm having one or two, that's it. And again, it's just that adaptation to the environment. It doesn't pay to have a lot of children in the United Kingdom based on the, economic, it's very expensive to raise children in the UK versus Nigeria. So people just adapt very, very quickly. And one of the things I found really, really fascinating was the impact of the delayed, the paternal age of reproductions with telomeres. So the impact of, civilization experiencing food shortage, getting people to then reproduce later, how that affects us epigenetically in terms of the longer, the telomere length. I don't know if you kind of remember that part of the video or something.
I do, and telomeres, as you mentioned, we don't understand everything about them. They're definitely related to aging. And some other important things. And this is related to the point I was making, that if you have a species like this weird clam in the North Atlantic that just can reproduce, takes decades to reach sexual maturation and then keeps on going for hundreds of years, you're creating an atmosphere for ever longer telomeres and because of the relationship, much greater longevity.
Certainly. And it would be great at one point, and I'm going to try and find some research surrounding this, looking at the longevity of individuals whose parents had longer telomeres. So again, the study indicated that it was...
They've done some studies on certain people, but this I don't know if they emphasized the telomeres. What they really were stressing is the point in time they had children through generations, that there was sort of a repeated process of these people having children, say in their late 30s as opposed to their late teens or mid-teens or whatever. And they saw a trend in the families they were examining, that they just had greater levels of longevity than a lot of the other populations.
Certainly, in addition to to better overall health, I think that's one of the...
Yeah, some of these people were living well into their late 90s, early 100s, whatever.
Certainly. So again, it just shows just how well we adapt to the environment. Okay, so, I guess we couldn't, when food was very, very scarce, having a lot of children didn't make sense, so we reproduced later, and as a result, those children, as long as they weren't maybe, let's say, killed by, the plague or something, then simply lived far longer. So it made a lot of sense from an environmental.
And the other thing that I think we should mention is that when you have fewer children and you're just less focused on just, frankly speaking, fucking and reproducing, it leaves a lot of room for other things. Where do people think a lot of these aspects we've come to know in civilization were brought about. It was in the quote unquote idle downtime,
Yeah.
the free time people had when they didn't just have to hunt and survive. Innovations and things like that. These things usually come about when people have leisure time and have some free time to do the things they need to do. And some of the greatest minds, and Newton was a lunatic in some respects, but all the laws of physics, he was just he didn't have to worry about making money particularly, and he had the time to do it. And if you free up time, because you're not constantly popping out children and don't have to constantly pay attention to them, then that allows you to devote your time and energy to other things.
Most certainly. And again, I know I know that we discussed this in our last call, but it gives me a lot of comfort to really see that finally in the manosphere we're addressing the issue of the quote unquote alpha male, and I'm quite disappointed that there's this idea that this kind of brutish alpha male is the idealist, so the kind of standard that men should aim for, when really these individuals, it's the quote-unquote beta male who all of the advances we've made today, it's that beta male.
Put it this way, the alpha, women, human females, human female apes, they employ two strategies basically, long-term and short-term mating strategy.
Yeah.
The quote-unquote alpha male, the high testosterone, broad-shouldered, blah, 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 he's a short-term strategy kind of guy. He displays basically physical genetic fitness.
Yeah.
Women, of course, and I'm going to be planning on making a video going into much more depth on reproductive strategy. Women, of course, men really only have one concern. They think about genetic fitness for the most part.
Yeah.
Women, they have to think about resource provision and they have to think about genetic fitness. And now, one of the reasons why you have an app such as Tinder, which I don't use for obvious reasons, that's so successful, and tons of people. I know Nico Chomsky uses it.
I use Tinder as well.
And you being the pimp that you are, you use it too. And there's a reason for this, because we're talking about how nutritional abundance, food abundance, and what have you has a direct effect on people's mating strategies. I would argue that if we had we were living in a time of great resource scarcity, specifically food scarcity, women would be much less willing to engage. What is a Tinder hookup? It's a short term. Obviously, I'm not talking about proximate cause. I'm talking about distal cause here, right? Sure. Distally speaking, it's a short term mating strategy. Yeah. You had mentioned that you were in Amsterdam and some women wanted to hook up with you. That's a short term mating strategy. They saw that you looked fit, so they thought, let me get some good genes in me. That kind of setup almost certainly would not exist, and didn't. I'm not even just talking about technology. I would argue, even if we had the identical levels of technology, say there was some massive famine that swept over the world, things like Tinder would disappear, and the shift, women would be much more focused primarily on resource provision rather than, I'm not going to say it's a perfect 50-50, but you see more and more in applications such as Tinder, in the survey that was taken in 2010, and women's opinions of the physical appearance and physical qualities of the men on, I think it was OkCupid, yeah, how they were all below subpar. So women increasingly are much more interested in their short-term mating strategy, and some of them actually follow through on that, particularly in urban ghettos and in chav culture.
For sure.
And this is, I think, everything to do with food scarcity, lack of food scarcity, because they can afford to hook up with you and in air quotes mate with you. Of course, they're just doing it for pleasure, but we know that behind that is the desire to reproduce. They wouldn't do that if we were queuing up for loaves of bread because there was some massive starvation occurring.
Agreed. Well, through the welfare system, women are able to socialize the cost of their reproductive strategy in a way that men can't do, or can't do to the same extent. And again, I don't think this is either good nor bad. It just is what it is. But the environment also then reinforces their desire to focus strictly on the genetic fitness part of the reproductive
Absolutely.
the reproductive spectrum.
I'm convinced that Tinder. I mean, Tinder is hard evidence for this because
certainly.
I'm, as you know, you're a pimp master of Tinder. I don't even know really what from what Nico has told me, because he likes to brag about his conquests every now and then. He'll I guess it involves swiping. A right swipe is what? Approval, and a left swipe is disapproval.
Exactly. I mean, it's almost the same app as Hot or Not, where you swipe upwards with Hot or Not if the person looks good. So it's a pure genetic fitness thing. So people,
right.
T-shirts off.
So if you get a right swipe, that means that they want to fuck you.
There's a little bit more that kind of goes into it. Then you have to use a lot of, I guess, pre-canned lines. So the goal is as quickly as possible, you want to get the girl onto your mobile phone. And
right.
as quickly as possible from mobile phone to meet up. So ideally you want to have about 24 to 48 hours from right swipe to meeting her in front of you. So it's a pure lust, genetic, kind of, does he look good or does she look good? Let's meet up and fuck, for sure.
Yeah, getting those genetic fitness genes. Now,
sure.
And I mean, this has been talked about by Rollo and the stages of hypergamy. But the reality is that this tends to be mostly a phenomenon of women in their teens and their 20s. And then, of course, when resource provision becomes more important, although not exclusively, as you mentioned, due to the welfare state, I would reckon that the older women get, not just due to that, but also due to diminishing SMB, you're not going to find too many 35, 40-year-old women hanging out on Tinder. Maybe if they're desperate, looking for validation, but I would, and I don't have the evidence because I don't use Tinder. Most of the women there tend to be fairly young, somewhere in their teens or 20s. Yeah,
most certainly. You will find quite a lot of older women there. Okay. And they're the most sexually aggressive.
Right, because they're looking for validation, essentially.
Absolutely.
They're used goods. Their vaginas stink. Their skin is saggy. Nobody wants to have sex with them. So if they can actually get it, it gives them a boost to their ego.
Exactly, and also because they're far more sexually aggressive. So this is just something I've noticed on the site, that the kind of younger, attractive women. Yeah, that they'll have they'll have half their chest on display, so you'll see a lot of cleavage. The older women will just be in underwear with their legs open, but because of course, they have to make up that SMV deficiency somehow.
Yeah.
The older woman who's maybe at that point, maybe a 2 over 10 or whatever, has to do something to keep you interested, and that's just all out your sexuality just off the bat.
Yeah, and some of these women, from my understanding, actually have children.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if there's anything, I had a thing once with a mother. My recommendation is never ever get involved with a single mother, or for that matter, unless she's you're thinking about retiring in the golden age or whatever. Just don't get involved with women with children.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons because they devote all the time to their kids. They're not going to have time to work on a relationship with you, blah, blah, blah. The list is endless. And there are too many guys out there, I've noticed, luminaries as well, whose names I'm not going to mention, that are luminaries, not really, but prominent people in various YouTube corners that are actually supporting, and that's their prerogative and their choice, children that are not genetically related to themselves. Which, say that makes them happy, why not? But
for sure. Well, I've seen it repeatedly just in, for friends and, for example, with my ex-wife who's now with another guy. And every time I see the guy, he just looks like he's aged like another 6 months. It's very, very draining to have to look after a child under any circumstances. It's a lot of work. But then if the child isn't biologically yours, for me, that's a double tough situation, because at the end of the day, the child's going to say, thanks very much for all the support, but I want to go back to my biological father or mother now. It's
I mean, that's a difficult. In your case, my understanding is your ex-wife knocked out a kid with him too.
Oh yes, for sure.
So she's got lockdown on him. And I guess he's got to be a part-time father to your daughter as well, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah, but before he knocks her up, I was this close to sitting him down and handing him the red pill. But he
Yeah.
would have assumed that I did it out of a position of jealousy or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's unfortunate, but you know, these these husks of men. I mean, you can't save them, but they can at least serve as an example to other men to prevent themselves from getting into a situation like that.
I agree. That's a very, very good point. Hopefully other people will learn from his situation.
It's kind of like, I mean, it's a horrible analogy in the both sense that it's not maybe perfect, and it's also kind of, you know, I guess morally but you know, people who've had lots of unprotected sex get STDs and end up dying. It's terrible what happened to them, but they serve as an example to other people not to do that sort of thing. And I look at these men who have lost themselves and have no identity other than that of a worker drone or a robot or both. You know, they're lost. There's nothing you can do to save them.
Exactly.
But it's okay because they serve their sacrifice, their mindless servitude serves as a lesson to other men, both young, middle-aged, and old, that kind of behavior is soul-crushing, soul-destroying, and drains your vitality. As you pointed out, they age faster.
Agreed. Well, when I look at him physically versus, let's say, I guess 2 years ago versus now, he looks like a completely different human being. You know, the skin is worse, and again, I'm literally just an impartial observer. He always looks stressed. You know, he's under tremendous amounts of stress.
Yeah,
and,
both from, you know, taking care of his children, and of course dealing with your horrible ex-wife.
Exactly.
So,
well, one of, you know, kind of growing up, one of the biggest adverts for me to never go into the military was to see men who had come out of the military. You know,
yeah.
and it's the same thing, just the horrible injuries and the psychological scars and the poverty.
Yeah, and the countless tales of the infidelity of military wives that are just legion.
That's legion. It's
yeah. I mean, I definitely see that angle myself. I think in a lot of ways, some of my attitudes predated me becoming MGTOW. I was always quote unquote selfish. I just, you know, people are, why don't you serve the country, do something greater for the. Why would I do that? I don't care about the country. You know, I was born in New York, but that doesn't mean I barely even associate with the United States. At best, I associate with being in New York, or maybe. So it's kind of just never really made sense to me, that aspect of it, and yeah, I could see the advantages economically if you're. You know, I've heard a lot of. I met a guy that came from West Virginia, and the military pulled him out of poverty, and he was able to get an education as a civil engineer, and so on. You know, so okay, that's great, but I wasn't in that position, so just the military never appealed to me.
For sure.
But all these guys just serve as examples. I hate to say it, you can't save everyone. It's triage.
For sure.
And the vast majority of men are just going to end up being in that position more or less. And you know, the only thing it's kind of like taking doctor's notes, or you're a scientist studying. You can, as you observe this guy's journey through time, you'll see how he ages, how he gets health problems, and you can sort of use it as a documentary to yourself and as you speak to fellow men, what not to do.
Certainly,
you know?
Certainly. Well, it's funny because. You know, my daughter, even at this age, has been, hey, one day, Mummy says I'm going to be married. And I said, look, don't ever do that. I said, look, don't ever marry. And of course, for her, if, let's say, she married in today's environment, she has tremendous benefits to gain from it. But I just think about just the poor boy who will have to go through that.
Yeah, and I got to credit you. It just shows how deeply you care about men. I remember, never forget, you said that, if you down the line you were to meet the boyfriend or the husband or fiance of your daughter, you would say, look, guy, I like my daughter a lot, but don't get married.
Exactly. Like, if you guys want to live together and be partners, do that, but don't sign anything. If possible, don't even live together.
Yeah, well, because common law. I mean, yeah, but I mean, this really shows to me, your sort of deep devotion to MGTOW principles and to the truth as well. I mean, there are too many people, and I want to comment on this. It's really important. I think you, as a father of a female offspring in particular, you're very rational about it. A lot of these guys I'll see, they'll have daughters, and they're all saying they're in the waltz or this and that. Can you imagine? I mean, this is just men, fathers of daughters, just turning their brains off, essentially.
For sure.
They're saying, if that argument held water, by definition, every daughter has a father, and so every daughter wouldn't be hypergamous, wouldn't be this, wouldn't be that. That's simply not true.
For sure.
And you're probably the only one I've talked to or heard speak rationally about his own daughter. I understand paternal investment and parental love. At the same time, any relationship, no matter how fantastic your daughter is, and I suspect that if you had been raising her solely by yourself, she'd probably be growing up a lot better. But unfortunately, she's exposed to the vitriol of your ex-wife.
Sure.
She's going to be a mixed bag, and she
sure.
probably won't be a quote-unquote good catch for a lot of men, mostly in part due to the laws and her own hypergamy, but also due to the way your ex-wife is raising her.
For sure. But because, again, my ex-wife is very, very much focused, as a lot of women are, just purely on the physical. And I mean her own physical appearance. So everything is, how does she look? It's about dressing a certain way. And, wherever possible, roping a guy in to then pay for that lifestyle. And this is something I actually set my ex-wife down, about, and I said, look, with all due respect, I really hope my daughter doesn't turn out like you. And I explained to her, I said, look, because of X, Y, Z, I said, look, she may find herself in a world where actually your physical looks don't matter all that much. And if you only give her the type of upbringing which you've had, which is when you're 6 years old, your mother hands you nail paint. I said, look, she'll be functionally useless for this world. I said she needs to spend a lot of time with myself, just so she...
Almost certainly. And I think you're spot on, because even if... I think there's a reason why men, I've said this in many recent videos, men are increasingly just not very turned on by the physical lure of women.
Exactly.
We see what else they have to offer, which is next to nothing.
Exactly.
And just think, okay, that's it. Women, I think, tend to want, even though they're not as committed as men are in relationships, they want commitment more than men.
For sure.
And she's not going to be able to get that if, frankly speaking, she turns out to be a kind of Barbie doll character.
Exactly. So even now, for example, every once in a while, when I go to pick her up, I'll see her nails are painted, and I'll say to her mother, I said, look, stop doing this, because, there's plenty of time for her to do that. Allow her to focus on things which help her develop her mind, because ultimately, you're making such an investment in things that are just, ethereal, or just whimsical,
Yeah. Well, I mean, given what I know about your ex-wife, it doesn't sound like she'd be the kind of person, here's a book about, I don't know, the rainforest and the species that live in it, enrich your mind. I mean, she just doesn't seem to have, that kind of interest or that inclination.
No, she doesn't.
As you pointed out, she's just physical, and she's essentially a useless eater, basically, apart from her waning physical beauty, from my impression.
For sure. Well, you know what I find really, really incredible about the whole situation, and I only found this out when I came into the manosphere. When I first met her, I thought she was into learning in the same way I was. It was a cruel bait and switch. It was a real bait and switch. Yeah. For like the first year, she would even read books and show like a real curiosity about what I did for a living and try to understand my industry. that all went out the window the moment we moved in together.
It's so hysterical retrospectively. I actually think a woman would be interested in you as a person and share intellectual.
It was only later on that I would say, hey, like there's this fascinating article about X in, let's say, The Economist, or some. I no longer read The Economist. I find it just too juvenile now. But I would maybe read The Economist. I'd read it and I'll say later, and she would just kind of throw it away. She just had no interest, and it's only when I then got into the manosphere I realized, okay, well, that's what women do. It's the initial pretense. So, you know.
Yeah. And they're really good. If you're not aware of this, they're really good at that. But I think when you're actually aware of these things and your interaction with women, you can tell. I mean, they're not interested in what you're doing. I've either in the past or now, I've never met a woman who actually had an interest in what I was doing. I mean, in the case of the South Korean girlfriend I had in South Korea, I mean, she had an interest in what I was doing because it helped her improve her English, I think, ultimately. That was kind of the hypergamous benefit there.
Okay.
It wasn't the money, because, like I said, she used to buy me meals, and she was kind of an obedient slave, but she knew she could improve her English with me because, after all, I was mentioned many times, my Korean to this day isn't that great, and a lot of that has to do with just being stressed out, unhealthy, and overworked, and chronically tired. So, it is really funny though if you think about things like that. I mean, I suppose there could be exceptions if you met a woman who was directly involved in, I don't know, genetic archaeology or evolutionary biology or something, or it was an economist. Okay, then yeah, maybe. But the vast majority of women, they just I think it's related to a comment I've made several times in many videos and then often in these talks, is that women don't find intelligence in of itself and the things that you can do. They don't find abstractions particularly interesting.
Yeah.
They want to know what you can do with the intelligence. So if nuclear and particle physics, for example, respectively, were amazingly remunerative fields, you could just make shit tons of money. They'd be saying, instead of doctor or lawyer, they're saying, I'm looking for a particle physicist husband. It's not because they're interested in this shit or even have a clue about it. It's because it's just whatever is pragmatic. And even that recent talk with Sargon of Akkad and Girl Writes What, Sargon, who's married, may the gods protect him, he mentioned how he's into programming and whatever, and he wants to explain something to his wife, and his wife just says, I just want to know if it works. Don't tell me anything else. And Girl Writes What said the same thing. I don't want to know about programming and blah, blah, blah. I just, does it work or not?
Precisely.
So that's a critical difference. Men want to understand how the world works, and it all depends. I mean, my thing, for example, always tend to be less of more than mechanical, but I wanted to know how psychology and language work. In our own respective way, we all want to understand as men, whether it's the economy, human language, the way a building is structured, chemical, whatever it is. We're deeply fascinated by this, and this is just not something that there are a few exceptions. But there aren't many women in science in general. But yeah, they're just not interested in that. My mother's the same way.
So is mine.
Work.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, she'll just hire someone.
Yeah.
Because my father's too old to really understand computers, or not necessarily that, but he's always been kind of a Luddite. But yeah, she'll say, "Oh, the computer was down, so this computer tutor she has, she'll just pay him extra money, and then he'll just fix it and whatever." So,
well, I don't know if you've experienced this, and I'm sure you probably have that. Let's say, for example, I'm really into economics. That's one of my big hobbies. I study it religiously. I really enjoy it. So, particularly economic history.
Name Friedman, watch over you.
For sure. But every once in a while, I'll maybe find out. I'll meet a woman, and she'll say, "Hey, I'm an economist for." And I remember I met this girl once, and she was an economist for the UN, and she works in the Asian Development Bank, part of the UN. And we had like a little physical thing, but the moment I found out she was an economist, I became really, really excited, and I started just kind of throwing theories at her and really trying to understand her kind of viewpoint and her beliefs. Did she come from the Keynesian school versus, let's say, the Austrian school? And she just was completely blank. She just had no idea about anything that I was talking about, even though she was a credentialed person within that field. So I just found that level of inquisitiveness about her own field that she...
Absolutely, man. And this 100% reflects my experiences in the past in the academic environment. In York in particular, when I was doing my MA in linguistics, I was always someone who was interested in just about everything related to language, and it was even a tough choice because it's somewhere along the line you needed to focus in on something like sociolinguistics, syntax, semantics, phonetics, phonology, and I chose syntax because I thought it most represented, what language is actually about, but it was a hard choice. I was still interested in tons of things. Now, a Hong Kongese girl who finished her PhD recently in linguistics and psycholinguistics, to be specific, she was doing it too. She got good grades, standard female, studying well, remembering things, right, copying and pasting essentially. But, and in some regards, even better grades than I had, but I wasn't the best student, to be fair. But having theoretical discussions about language in general, it just didn't interest her. What she was interested in was getting the good grades, getting the degree, and then focusing on her specific topic. Yeah. And then likewise in observing her over Facebook on her PhD, a very, very specific topic. And I get that you have to specialize, but she never was interested in theoretical discussions.
For sure.
And this was also true of the female faculty. Now, my supervisor was a really, really bright guy of Hellenic, of Greek origin. It was kind of a polymath, good at just about everything. He actually ended up, he was just... And you could have discussions with him about, he tended to be very left-leaning, but whatever, about the economy, politics, philosophy, evolution. He even gave a talk about the relationship between language and music and respects to evolution. I mean, this guy, but all the female faculty members, they just had their little thing, like French syntax, and that was it, or whatever. And yeah, so the inquisitiveness, there are a lot of female academics, but one thing I'm always skeptical about is the general level of inquisitiveness and inquiry, and how much they actually want to, because to me, a lot of the time, it's just a job to them.
Yes.
And this is, I think, and I've discussed this with, everyone knows the High Lord neuroscientist. I only had one discussion with him, trying to get him back on to talk about female-male brain differences, but he has a PhD in neuroscience. He also has a master's in chemical engineering. Was very involved in academia. And he's commented, and I have to agree, my more limited experience, that academia today is much less about free inquiry and thought and exchanging ideas. It's very rigid, and it's become much more of a traditional job. And even Dr. Mills has pointed this out, publish or perish. And this sort of pragmatic, I'd even argue anti-intellectual aspect to academia is something that I think jives really well with women.
Oh, certainly.
Because women, if it's just a job you have to do, then you do the research for, I don't know, Cantonese L2 speakers acquiring English, and that's it. That's your job. Whereas it's increasingly difficult to find people involved in academia, women, well, regardless, but also men, who have a general knowledge as well as a general interest in a lot of different things. And it's just very, very specific. And women, here's the thing, that even if we were to arrive at a stage in civilization, say in a decade or two, where women were, how should I put it, they realized that their physical goods weren't enough, so they'd have to, women can do, they could force themselves to acquire other skills. It would just be feigning it. It would just be a pretense. They wouldn't. It would be a means to an end, just like they put on makeup to improve their appearance. They would be putting on their kind of cerebral cap, their cerebral makeup, and then, look what I know, look what I studied, blah, 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 blah.
Or they'll learn enough to fool you for about 6 months.
Yeah. And then the rest of, biology will kick in. You'll want to keep on having sex and all that, and then they'll just... It's a pretty hollow and transparent game.
For sure.
And
well, one of the things that I've noticed, for example, in the field that I work in is this. I get a lot of papers across my desk because of the work I do in the journals that I run. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that most of the articles, these are pretty dense scientific articles, so there'll be original studies, sometimes 30, 40 pages in length, looking at, let's say, the management of hepatocellular carcinoma or acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So, it's pretty heavy stuff. What I tend to see over the years, and I haven't done any level of research into this is purely just my own observation, is that men are far more likely to to take on sole authorship of papers, so they'll feel confident enough in the subject at hand to develop the entire paper themselves.
Greater risk taking.
Exactly. But what I tend to find with the female half of the submissions or the authors who submit to me are that they will be on these papers with sometimes 10, 15, 16 other co-authors because of the security in numbers, so,
yeah.
and also, and I'll actually go on the record and say this, they often don't know their subjects as well. So that guy really understands his subject, whether it be the use of bisphosphonates for the prevention of bone metastasis. He gets it, and he can confidently put together either a review article or an original article on it. That female, even though she may see twice as many patients, simply won't understand the theoretical side and how you bridge that gap between the bench to bedside, as it were. So she'll have to get on a biostatistician, an endocrinologist. She might be an oncologist. She'll then bring across a hematologist, and then it's far more multidisciplinary in nature. Just that particular article. So. And again, these are just the things I've seen in my own observation.
I've seen it too in publications. I mean, obviously I'm a layperson, but I make it a point to read interesting articles and publications on EVO, everything related to human beings, and also looking just across the board in academic. And it's usually co-authorship, multiple authors, etc. Yeah. Even then, women don't seem to want to take the risk that can have a payoff or not. And why should they? I mean, there's no benefit to them. They're not trying to gain status.
Exactly.
Women's status is largely irrelevant to men. So they have their job, and that's it. And although I think there might be some small number of women interested in breakthroughs and discovery, that it tends to be the province of men. And I think this is all well and good, but one thing that I've often wondered is women's complete... Well, I get why, but their lack of gratitude or acknowledgement, because there are tons of things that I'm kind of atypical. I'm not as tech savvy as I'd like to be, and I'll frequently ask a friend for help, but I'm enormously grateful. In fact, I'll pay him sometimes for his help, because I just recognize it's such a valuable skill to have. I wish I had it, but given my age, I can't rewind time 20 years and learn all the shit I need to learn. I have to focus on what I'm good at for the most part. And women they think it's a given, but I don't think of a man's skill or his knowledge as a given. And it's just, for example, I need to get new furniture, and I was talking to my friend, and he said, next month or something, I said, look, I'll give you, I'm not rich, a small wage or something. He said, no, I couldn't accept that because but I'm still willing to give him a small wage within my limits. I can't imagine a woman ever saying to a friend, can you, because it's taking time out of his day. I don't want to waste his time. Just this lack of acknowledgement and lack of basically basic human respect for a person's labor, their knowledge, and their contributions. I try to honor that to the degree I can within my limited means. I've never seen that happen with women.
Same here. I think part of it is certainly social. So what tends to happen is that women, of course, and this is just my own kind of theory here, but because they're more neotenous, people just want to do things for them, so people do more things for them. Then over a period of time, they become, I guess, habituated to just getting free things. So for example, my daughter, I had her in London yesterday, and this pretty much happens whenever I go into a shop, so somebody will just hand her something, and
like a lollipop or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether that happens to all children, and it's nothing sexual, it's nothing like that. It's just that they just see somebody who looks, neotenous and is very, very young, and they just, here you go. And that will continue throughout her life until, let's say, maybe she hits the wall at the age of maybe 27 or 30 or whatever. So as a result, each guy doing more stuff for her, or each human being.
Reinforces it. Yeah.
Exactly. And then somebody else bringing in something else. Hey, I'm going to help you put up your cabinet. Well, people have just been doing things for her entire life. So it's not that special.
Yeah. No, I definitely think there's a social. I mean, it's biology that leads to a certain kind of social behavior, right?
Precisely.
Gerwitz Wood in her talk with Sargon of Akkad was mentioning how she has this neighbor who, when she saw that Gerwitz Wood was basically splitting the work with her husband of unloading groceries from the car, her neighbor, this female neighbor, thought that it was sort of scandalous that her husband wasn't doing everything, that they were doing 50-50 was an indication that he was doing nothing, essentially. And it's just bizarre. And this kind of blindness to these kinds of behaviors it's so stubborn. I was watching there's a Canadian show that's run by a guy named, I think, Steve Pulkin. It's basically, sometimes I'll have interesting talks, and there was an alternative host on, I forgot her name, some overweight woman talking to a retired professor emeritus, and this other woman was basically, as you might say, championing sort of men's position, although I thought it was from a tradcon position, but still, she was saying, men are being excluded from society. And she even mentioned the artificial womb and how women were just totally against it. And the other woman, the person interviewing her, was saying, I just don't see it. And it just goes to show how blind, the kind of blinders that people, specifically women, need to have on. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And
sure.
And it's because, you go through life as a man without having everyone do everything for you, that when I can't do something, like if there's some really funky computer problem that I can't fix, and I got to have a friend that has to spend a couple hours on, I'll pay him a little something because
sure.
If I can. In fact, when I'm not total disclosure here. If and when I get my new computer, get everything set up, I probably could do it on my own. But frankly speaking, I'm going to just pay my friend to help me out and just do it for me because it's easier, it's more efficient this way for me. Whereas I think if I were a woman, I would just sort of expect someone just to do it for me for free.
Exactly. Well, women have, and I think Rollo Tomassi and a couple of other guys have pointed this out, that they're hardwired to be immune to the suffering of men, or the contribution of men.
Yeah.
You're never going to get a real, appreciation of your efforts. And again, that's what I respect about Rollo's work. That he says, look, she will never appreciate the fact that you moved across the country so that she could go to college somewhere. That maybe you'll get one night of it, like a great fuck out of it, like on the night that you did it. But after that point,
absolutely. I mean, it's brief. It's the corollary of Brifo's law, right?
Sure.
Past investment doesn't. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it memorized, but doesn't give you a promise of a return on that at a later date.
Exactly.
In theory, you just have to keep on doing stuff, and then in that limited time window of a night or a day or two, then she might remember. But this has been universally my experience with women as well. And I thought it was really telling. Nico Chomsky did this video where he was talking about his dying grandfather, and how his grandmother just said, it would be a good thing if he dies. He's not really useful anymore. He can't really do much. And this is a guy who had labored to the bone, got arthritis, all these kinds of minor and then now major health problems.
Yeah, he put his health on the line for her benefit.
Yeah, but it's just... and I think the key here is the way women evolve. I mean, there's a real good reason, I think, and I'm hypothesizing, but I think we could probably find evidence for this. There's a reason why women don't care about men's well-being and their actual contributions and don't respect it. Because if they did, they wouldn't be able to devote all their time to their immediate offspring.
Precisely.
After all, that's the priority. So I get it from an evolutionary perspective why women don't care about men, why they don't respect men, why they just expect favors and all this. That makes perfect sense. The problem why this is maladaptive, and I'm bringing up the maladaptation again, is the same reason so many other things are with multitasking and the idea of, say, kind of behavioral version of Fisherian runaway with regards to human beings, is that we're not living in that society anymore. As we pointed out, we started the talk. We're not living in a scarcity society. We're living in a resource-rich, food-rich society. This kind of behavior worked really, really well in a resource-scarce environment where the guy is just a means to an end, knocking you up, giving you resources so you can get your children out there who then can repeat the cycle, or even further back. But one of the reasons why MGTOW exists, among some of the reasons you hypothesized, in addition to the mechanism, is that men realize that women aren't hardwired that way, and rather than just accept that, essentially become some sort of beta provider or provider work. So, well, this is the best you can get, which is what Rollo's argument is essentially.
Yes.
She's never going to acknowledge you. She's never going to care about your 20 years of service to her, the fact you mean blah 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 blah. So you just need to accept it, but at least she'll spread her legs for you sometimes. That's a bad argument, because we've been witnessing for decades different forms of maladaptive behavior, and this is one of them. Yeah. Men are waking up and realizing women have no respect for them, no respect for their accomplishments, no respect for the hard work they put in, and it's disgusting us, frankly. And this isn't just, we're unwilling to accept it and we're sort of reverting to blue pill. We're as red pill as anyone else.
For sure.
It's just, there comes a time when the environment is so different that some people have to shape up, or as they say, ship out. And as far as MGTOW is concerned, because women seem largely incapable of acknowledging male accomplishment, suffering, merit, or just generosity and kindness beyond a quick fuck or a day or two, this is behavior that is ethically and morally repugnant to us. It's disgusting, and frankly speaking, in this regard, I do find women disgusting. I don't think they're evil. I understand the reason why it exists, as I say. Women who, in terms of our evolutionary history, who had wasted too much time thinking and worrying about their men rather than their children, would have had effectively partitioned interests, and that would have taken it away from her own. Pregnancy is part of that too. Just enormous investment in their own offspring. I get it, but we're not in that time period anymore, and we're going to either have to artificially come up with something, or things are going to get worse and worse, because men, I think Gerwig's talked about this eons ago. I mean, one of the things that this never fit me, but, your typical blue pill guy, it's okay being a workhorse provider, provided you get some, chunk of metal on put on your chest, or some,
a red ribbon.
A red ribbon, or you done good, kid. You done good. Something like that. As long as you get some kind of acknowledgement, you'll say, and he'll start wagging his tail and say, more. I'll do more. So that's kind of, for a lot of guys, that's enough. But we don't even have that anymore.
For sure.
And this is leading men to a much deeper insight about the way women interact and their nature. And the problem with Rollo, once again, is his observations are spot on, but he just says, take it like a man. And I said, why should we? Honestly, I've gone on record saying this before. I vastly prefer talking to men over women. I vastly enjoy my interaction. I mean, I think about your video. I don't think I was worthy to this day of that, where you mentioned how I had helped you, and I'm kind of shocked. I'm humbled, but I still can't think of a woman ever making a video like that about a guy or for that matter, a woman who helped her. It's just the kind of reciprocity that men show each other is, frankly speaking, a much higher standard of human behavior than what women show, and I'm in no problem saying that.
Same here. Same here. And I guess just in response to the maladaptations that we've seen in society, we can almost separate men into two camps. There's one camp of men, probably that Rollo is a part of, and again, I have a lot of respect for Rollo, but so he sees the fact that with an increase in standard of living, women are far more hypergamous. You're never going to get fair value from her. He acknowledges this. You're never going to get any level of, a pat on the back even. And he, recommends that men double down their efforts. So and you can kind of see that in the aggressive white knighting, that the way men hold on to their women for dear life.
I don't. Is that his position? I think his position is to apply game.
Yes, okay.
Control
Okay.
the woman or
For
something.
sure,
Yeah.
for sure. So maybe I've kind of put him in the wrong camp. But one school of thought now is that, show her you love her, so you'll get these guys who...
That's a woman's school. That's what women
Exactly.
want. They want him to give them shit and show how much you quote-unquote love them.
Exactly. So a guy spends $80K on a wedding ring or something, so it's indicative of what we're now
He loves her.
Yeah. And another school of thought is saying, look, we understand these maladaptations, we understand their root cause, and we understand that in many ways nothing's going to change this bar societal collapse. So we lack the ability to affect how civilization turns out, but based on the learning we have here, it makes a lot of sense to simply avoid them.
Yeah, and go your own way. I mean, I think that's what there are all kinds of labels people outside of MGTOW put to MGTOW, but I get a lot more. I get everything I need with the exception of sexual interaction from my male friendships and interactions.
Same
my life is enriched by it. You've helped me out tremendously. I have other friends help me out.
And vice versa.
It's just I can't think of a single instance of working apart from my mother, genetic investment and all that, offspring. Can't think of a single instance in my life where a woman, no, it just doesn't happen. And this isn't just anecdotal. We see this is just universal stuff. The way Sargon was describing his wife. I mean, I like Sargon for the most part, but probably maybe it's not me PC me to say, but I think the way his wife looks at him is exactly the way every woman looks at a man. He's a workhorse provider, and if you're cool with that, that's cool. But MGTOW, that's just not suitable. And I don't want to, I certainly don't hate women. I don't think they're evil. I just cited the evolutionary reasons why that's the case. Yeah. But generally speaking, at least in my life as an individual, I don't want to interact with people who don't understand the principle of reciprocity.
Agreed.
Don't understand respect and mutual investment and in terms of knowledge and sharing and support. And because women generally don't fit those criteria, I just don't deal with them.
For sure. And again, I mean, I agree with all of those points. And for me, that's what the essence of MGTOW is. We're responding to the environment, in the only way possible. So if you recognize
the only rational way, I would argue, because
exactly.
Barring this obsession with reproduction, I know already you had a kid, but
I wouldn't do it again.
I just don't get it. We talked about this before. Apart from that, my short lifespan, I want to have a relatively stress-free life.
Sure.
I want to enjoy the people I do interact with, and to the extent that I can. Why would I put that on myself? The allure of pussy is just not great enough. And I think you move to a stage, especially going your own way, where you just want more from life and more from people, and you realize that men are the only ones who can give that to you.
For sure, absolutely. Well, perhaps it's because I remember in like a Barbarossa video, he said, look, men are, we're forming a collective consciousness for the male sex.
Mm.
And
yeah. I mean, in some sense, that's absolutely true. I mean, we're by no means as collectivistic, and we don't have this in-group preference, obviously, as indicated by, without naming names, some conflicts we had or disagreements recently and ongoing. And I've even seen men argue for this, and let's not belabor the point, but yeah. However, this definitely is in some sense a kind of a collective identification with each other, if only in the sense that we're recognizing that we're men, that we're wired a certain way, and because we're wired a certain way, we can appreciate these things on a far greater level than if we were just merely to take it for granted. Or certainly far greater than a woman can.
For sure, and just in terms of the in-group preference that you mentioned there, at one point an in-group preference was a very, very positive survival adaptation. People who looked like you, whether anatomically or racially, these individuals,
resembled kin.
Exactly.
And
and you were most likely to be safe, among them. But now it's, particularly with the in-group gender preference seen in the human female, this is potentially a threat to our civilization. I mean,
well, it already is.
Yeah.
You pointed this out in the medical field that the dearth of oncologists, the dearth of basically women doing the hardcore stuff, even though what they make up now at least a 50%, even a slight majority of doctors these days.
I read a stat the other day, and it came from a pretty credible source, that 70+% of the graduates in the UK now from medical school are female.
Yeah, well,
which has catastrophic implications for the future of medicine in this country.
And consequently civilization.
Oh, yes,
because,
absolutely.
I mean, you're well versed in cancer and oncology. I'm not, but I can just imagine, women aren't willing to do the hard work for that. And I mean, Gerwitz will point this out as well. Veterinary medicine is very popular. Women take care of the kitty cats, and I get that.
Sure.
I get that. But the really hardcore stuff is, and this is why you see articles. I was just kind of doing some passive research. The praise is being heaped on this singular female neurosurgeon. Yeah, it does happen, but but the thousands of men that do it, they go. I mean, but this is a society-wide thing. I mean,
exactly.
You would basically, for a male neurosurgeon to be recognized, he would need to perform the first brain transplant. And
right.
You look at this guy did it. Saving dozens of patients and that's not enough. He did the brain transplant. Wow.
Sure.
So yeah, it does have really ruinous consequences. Feminism, which we've talked about so many times, it's a lot more than just some sort of political Marxist thing going on. It's been devastating to men in general, to the male half of the species. It is run away. The worst aspects of female nature run away, and you don't need to label it as evil to understand that it can be ruinous and destructive.
For sure.
And
but
there's just no. Sorry.
Sorry, I apologize. Please go ahead.
No, there's no solution to that other than to go your own way, or you can take a huge risk, get married, and do all this other shit, and hope for the best. That sounds like a pretty bad business venture to me.
For sure. Well, because whatever harms men, because of the unique role that men have had in building and maintaining the civilization, whatever harms men harms the civilization. We're the most productive parts of the civilization, and have been responsible for the vast majority of all of the innovation and productivity gains that we've ever had as a species. So the kind of increasing marginalization of man, the increasing destruction of male spaces, the education system, which really harms men, but by essentially making them illiterate by the time they graduate. This serves to dramatically impact our civilization and means that many of the developments that we might have enjoyed, let's say, as a species in 30, 40, 50 years simply will never come into existence. Yes, we'll keep on innovating. There are still lots and lots of good companies, apex minds out there. However, the kind of rank and file, for want of a better term, beta male, who would have enough time to really dream something incredible up and then put that into reality, there'll just be less and less of these guys, because again the focus is on spending all of the tax money, or majority of the tax money, to hand out free shit to women. All of the education goes to, okay, how do we best educate girls? So now girls are getting the best grades, and hopefully,
so they can feel good about themselves.
Exactly.
It's retarded,
Exactly.
Let's give women every means of help possible, so they can feel good about themselves. That's never been applied to, when help has been given to men academically or scholastically, it's so they can do something. Men do stuff.
Yeah.
When help is given to women, it's not so much they can do stuff, it's so that they can feel good about themselves.
Exactly.
That's important.
It's a pure self-esteem
issue. Have a positive
issue.
image about themselves.
Exactly.
And I've seen debates between, was it Milo Yiannopoulos?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it was a scientist. I don't remember her exact field. And she was explaining to him the needs of women in science and how, sometimes women need to cry and to feel, and there should be a more sensitive approach, and da-da-da, and this would be the way to encourage women in science. And once again, all just feels. Make them feel good. Look, at the end of the day, life is, you need to be pragmatic about certain things.
Especially in science.
Absolutely. Science, there's no room for people's feelings in science. If you're butthurt about something, get over it, and if you're wrong about something, then whatever. Then you learn from it and you move on. This simply cannot be a model in science. Oh, I feel good. It's ridiculous. But this routinely, can you imagine? People going on now about how women are exceeding men, blah, blah. Can you imagine if the same proportion of energy and time and money were put into men? Maybe we'd have like flying cars like the Jetsons by now. The amount of energy and resources put into women, if it were just reversed and put into men.
Most certainly.
It would be incredible. It would be an incredible society.
It would be.
Once you invest in women, we have stagnation, we have economic sluggishness, we have the medical field becoming a very precarious and dangerous endeavor in the future for real serious diseases.
Well, in the medical field now, what we've now had is, I guess, over the last 5 years or so, there's been a very, very subtle shift in the type of research being performed. And again, I can't totally speak for, let's say, 30 years ago in the medical field, because I simply didn't operate in the pharmaceutical industry at that time. But at the very least, when I came into the industry, there was some very, very serious developments. So, the identification of, the HER2 gene and its impact on prognosis for metastatic breast cancer, all of the wonderful developments in terms of, let's say, taking, chronic myelogenous leukemia, identifying the Philadelphia chromosome, and the fact that when that's positive, that there's a drug known as imatinib, which is a tyrase kinase inhibitor. It's a TKI inhibitor, and it works through a certain pathway. So we turned this from a rapidly fatal disease, where the diagnosis to death was maybe 6 months, to a disease that people now live with for 10, 15, 30 years. And this was a time when we had a very, very male-dominated medical and research field. What you tend to see now, particularly within the kind of female-dominated parts of medicine, is that they'll have comparative studies, and it's just comparative studies after comparative studies after comparative studies. So they'll say, okay, for metastatic breast cancer, we'll compare, lapatinib with Taxotere, and okay, this one gave a median survival of a month greater than this agent, and it's like, woohoo, that's a huge thing, and that's research now. It's just pure comparative research. There's very, very little. There are still some really excellent companies and really, really excellent kind of labs out there for sure, but certainly not in the manner of 20, 30 years ago, considering that now we have far more research money just being poured into these areas. So let's say, for example, you take the American Society of Clinical Research. So most of their research now doesn't go into, let's say, identifying gene signatures and developing new agents. It's all comparative research, which women tend to love, and that's what they gravitate towards. So let's compare Taxotere with this in skin cancer, and it's just like, okay, this is great. So you get these very small incremental, I shouldn't even call them incremental, because again, if you're that one person who doesn't benefit from Taxotere, that trial doesn't really benefit you. That the participants in the trial survived for half a month longer, especially if that half a month is just suffering and pain. So all of the research needed to really take our civilization forward, we're not having as much of it now, because women are just rushing into the scientific fields. Because, quite simply, they don't enjoy the kind of science needed to take us forward as a species. It's just not their thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not involved in the pharmaceutical industry or medicine. I will have to take your word at some of the specifics, but yeah, like I said, in my academic experience of women discussing theoretical aspects of things beyond whatever it was that they were doing tended to be a killer of conversation. In fact, specifically, the Hong Kongese girl just tended to say, "What am I going to get for lunch?" or "What fancy restaurant I'm going to eat at," and her Facebook page is just plastered with pictures of her English boyfriend and them eating in exclusive restaurants with, the fancy restaurants where you pay 30 quid for 100 grams of steak with a fucking decoration on top and stuff like that. That kind of
with
thing.
a shaved carrot on the side.
Yeah, exactly. One sphere of ice cream that's supposed to be the best in the world, and it costs you, 20 quid or whatever. That kind of thing. This is not. I get that Facebook isn't serious and stuff, but there are plenty of groups I see run by men there. The Cambridge linguistics. There are people actually interested in this stuff and real discussion. But hers is just, as the famous mandate of my ex and others go, food, travel, and culture.
Those are hobbies, I think.
Right. That's a universal. You see it on most women's Facebook pages. Back in the day when I still did internet dating, food, travel, culture, going to the cinema is a hobby apparently. I guess my walk in the park is a hobby too. I guess. Not my idea of a hobby, but yeah. So
Same here.
It's fascinating how things have come full circle, and yeah, I don't know what can be done. I feel that it's good that guys like Milo Yiannopoulos and Sargon and the rest of them, they're kind of just at least sticking it back to feminists, but on the micro level, well, Giannis is great because first he's gay, right? Yeah. He has no reason to. If you're gay, you get nothing from women basically. If you're gay,
yeah.
So he can just stick it to them nonstop. And it's not like he's losing out on pussy because he likes dick, frankly.
Well, they can't threaten him with genetic annihilation. That if you don't keep up that line,
I'm not going to spread my legs. He'll just say I wasn't interested in your nasty snatch anyway. But that's important. That I think that that I should mention this. And more gay guys coming out talking about these kinds of things, that would be great because they have a leg up compared to us heterosexual guys that, frankly speaking, it's an enormous advantage.
For sure.
I even see this, and I'm not really in contact with former gay friends of mine, not all of them, but in some of them who realize that women can be quote unquote bitchy, and they have no tolerance for it really because what are they going to get out of it? Tolerating the bitchiness. It's not like they're waiting for holding out so they can bed them.
Sure.
So it's but of course you also find a lot of sympathy and. Well, I get it. He's horrible and blah 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 blah. But yeah, it's good that there are people taking it to feminists and sticking it to them. But on a micro level, I don't see a lot of that. I'm not encouraging men to encourage. Well, I am saying men don't get married, but ultimately it's their lives. But I think we just don't have the numbers, unfortunately, to affect real change, and that would require a kind of collective consciousness. As has come into being with MGTOW, but on a far, far massive scale. And most guys are just never going to be there, for better or worse.
Or it would take the MGTOW that we, the MGTOW and the numbers that we have to organize around a very, very kind of central point and organize completely around it. And again, I don't see that happening. Even now there isn't... I guess a universally accepted definition of MGTOW.
Yeah, well, no, let's not get into that. That caused enough ruckus. No reason to revisit it here.
Sure.
Maybe a topic for another time. But yeah, it's just too massive. What we can continue doing, getting back to the original topic, that's the kind of stuff we need to do. Identify these causal factors. Like I said, the food scarcity thing was something that I just had a mind blank about until you pointed out to me, and it seems so obvious now how that led to essentially the mechanization effect. And I am planning on getting around to a video where I will be talking about this in relation to several thousand years ago, some other things involved with that, different mating preferences and things like that. So I think this is the stuff we can do, especially on the ground as lay people.
Agreed.
There are just things that scientists are just afraid to touch with a 10-foot pole because they're just afraid of the consequences and so on. And I mean, all these neuroscientists you try to contact, still no word, I imagine.
Unfortunately not. It's been very disappointing, particularly because the research is it fits so well with what we're trying to address in the manosphere.
Yeah, you know, they're gonna. I guess they have personal interest and maybe they're enjoying it, but I mean, this stuff is what they're doing is so groundbreaking to prevent it from being essentially delivered to the public is a real disservice.
For sure, and that is one area that I deeply, deeply hope that research informs policy as quickly as possible, and that is in the neurological sex differences. Mm-hmm. You know, this is it's going to have a tremendous effect on public policy, and I think rightfully so, because at the moment, again, a lot of the laws we pass come from the assumption that any differences in outcomes stem from discrimination, and it's causing such a skewed economic and political life that hopefully, if this area of research just kind of goes into the political sphere. Hopefully,
I think it'd be political suicide, frankly.
Oh yes,
speaking.
For sure.
I think if a politician were to stand up and say, "Look, here's this neurological research. Here's the policy. It doesn't match up. This is what the data tell us. You know, we can't keep on with the policy. I mean, goodbye, politician Smith or whatever your name is. You're not going to be there anymore." And it's the whole reason why neuroscientists aren't keen, because they'd be associated with that kind of political suicide.
Sure.
They might have their research cut off, blah, blah, blah. No, they'd rather just do things in secret. And it's a real shame that there isn't more collaboration, because we're lay people willing to talk about this because we don't have the same stuff on the line. I don't have a political career, but theirs are the contributions that really need to get out there. And we need to have conversations with these people to talk about this stuff, and it seems impossible.
Yeah,
you can get an Evo Psych on every now and then, but you know, it's really, really difficult. So I don't know. I think the best case scenario is a sort of lockstep where you have the FFRs, the feminist first responders, kind of just continually punching back at feminists, and I guess that's a good thing. And we can continue to understand the deeper causes of things and understand how we got here. And who knows, maybe some credentialed scientists would want to one day pair up with us and talk about this stuff. But, I mean, no. When it comes to application and doing research for this forthcoming video that I either will be out next month or sometime later next week, you know, they draw conclusions, but they never think about the applications it might have to our current society.
Yeah.
So, you know, a couple of things happened in the Neolithic period in Europe specifically that I found really interesting. I'll be talking about it. They never think about the applications to modern society. It's just, isn't this interesting? This happened so and so amount of time ago. Great. And I guess that's a real debate in the scientific community.
Yeah.
Scientific discovery and what have you should have an impact on policy or should they interact with political figures or public figures? No, should we just leave ourselves out of it? That's a big discussion. I know a lot of scientists. Most of them just think we should have just nothing to do. We should just concentrate on research. But but sometimes researchers could have an effect.
For sure, particularly because the taxpayer is funding it. So I would hope, at least as a layperson, that research helps drive more efficient use of tax monies, you know, because this is ultimately what we're asking, that if we're going to fund an academic community, allow the benefits to then get back to the funders, that is the taxpayer, by better understanding the environmental issues we face and the social issues we face and their biological drivers, so that we can just have a more, conducive society to everybody's needs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like a pipe dream now, Clive. I don't see that.
For
I
sure.
don't see that happening anytime soon.
For
I
sure.
mean,
Well, scientists are very, very. They almost pride themselves now, and I see this a lot, on having as little to do with the public as possible. It's,
yeah. Well, this has a lot to do with a kind of climate of anti-intellectualism, which not now, but we talked about this, would make for an excellent MGTOW Talks topic. But I think they're afraid of being sort of repudiated. They're afraid of doing their ideas not being accepted. I mean, we saw the pushback in the early part of the century with regards to evolutionary biology being taught in schools in the United States, and there's still resistance to this, and there's still fundamental misunderstandings, and so it's in their best interest in a way, in order to conduct their experiments and their science in peace. But of course, this only has to do with science that has a human impact, right? Yeah. So the particle physicist or the astrophysicist who's studying the stars, I mean, they're more than happy to share the results.
Oh yes, for sure.
They don't. Yeah, look cool.
For sure.
Comet XYZ12 flew by, and it doesn't. They don't have to worry about these things. It's only the stuff that is relevant to human beings directly that people need to start worrying about. That's what they feel, at least.
For sure.
But it's unfortunate, but that this is always going to be the division. I mean, basically, human life sciences are in some sense doomed to failure because they don't get public attention, and when they do, it's twisted or it's part of an agenda. Whereas the things unrelated to human beings they flourish. People talk about it. Then nobody has a problem. They don't feel connected or offended, so it's fine.
For sure. Well, and also, if the research in any way, shape, or form could potentially paint women in less than a completely positive light, then it will never get into the press. And the reason I say that is this: that there was an author whom I contacted, and I found his PubMed article. He was discussing neurological sex differences in his paper, and I tried to persuade him to get onto a hangouts with me, and then he refused immediately. Then I went back into his paper and I read it because I thought, okay, well maybe I'll script something about this myself. And at the end of his paper, in fact I actually wanted to send it to you and I completely forgot, but I will try and find it and I'll send it to you. At the end of his paper, he put a quote there saying, "In no way, shape, or form should our research be used to I've forgotten the actual kind of verb he used. Further, it was about
shape policy or something.
It was about neurosexism. To reinforce gender stereotypes. That's it. Please don't use our research to reinforce gender stereotypes." And I was like, well, but your research does reinforce gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell?
These guys, they're just running scared. And we saw it, was it last year, with the guy, the physicist, I think it was an astrophysicist who literally landed something on a moving comet.
Oh yeah, it was like the first time ever. It was amazing.
Yeah, and he was taken down essentially to tears by a bunch of idiotic, hypocritical, self-righteous feminists, and
who can never equal his achievements. They won. Do you know what I mean?
They never even come close.
Yeah.
I mean, these are. I mean, talk about nether apes, these guys, compared to that guy. And this was brought up, I thought, quite saliently in the talk between Sargon and Girl Writes What. I mean, feminists bitch and complain about things they can't even do. They can't even fathom.
Exactly. Their main accomplishments seem to be, getting behind Twitter that men created. Exactly, or getting behind a camera that men created, and just bitching and moaning.
Yeah, women and, by extension, feminists tend to be pretty good at that. So.
For sure.
With that said, we kind of deviated from our original topic.
For
We
sure.
can always reprise it at some point in time. But everyone, thanks for listening. And once again, I really watched that video by Clive. Link will be in the video itself, hopefully, as well as in the low bar. Really puts that final piece in the puzzle of what led to the mechanization effect, which allowed for all, and it really, really fills in the gaps, and I think it's really important because of that. Very salient video. Everyone check it out.
Thank you.
And yeah, anything you'd like to add, Clive, as we about to close?
No, this is it's been very great to be here. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, guys, check you out later. Bye-bye.